Hello from wherever you are, and welcome to Let's Play Games. I'm John McFarland, Adult Services Librarian for Nashville Public Libraries, and I hope you'll join me in learning or rediscovering some of the more common and uncommon games out there. This will be our last episode covering the topic of chess. We went through the pieces of the board, their value, how to start the game, the middle. Now we've come to the end. We're going to show you a little bit more on how to close out a game and also show you a classic game all the way through that you can replicate and learn and adapt to your own methods. Let's get stuck in. Before we get to a little bit of a higher level game to give you a clear, concrete example, I want to talk about checkmates. It's the end game. It is the reason you do all of the moving and all of the taking of pieces is to set up checkmate. There's a couple different checkmate ideas that I want to give you so you have a general strategy. We've talked a lot about openings to this point. I also want to suggest that you learn quite a few end games. These are a little bit easier to remember because they're simplistic pieces. Usually there's only a couple left. And what I would suggest is you work backwards. If you know your endgame that you want to go for, I want to go for where I cornered the king in that spot. Well, what pieces are you going to do it with? Well, let's say I want to do it with the rook and the queen. You have to make sure that the rook and the queen, at least one of them, survive, or that the pawn can get all the way to the end and be promoted to a queen. So let me show you a couple different examples of ways that checkmates occur. So I'm sorry to say, we're gonna be taking advantage of black's pieces here, and we'll have our board. We'll set up a structure here. We'll say that black's here. This is entirely just for example purposes. So this first one is called an Anastasius Mate, named after a particular Russian, and it involves a rook and a queen pinning the king to the end of the board, and it can look one of a couple ways, but it involves there being no viable way for the king to escape. This rook goes all the way down this file, and because of that, they are in check. Well, because the queen is blocking off all of the escape routes, it's checkmate. There's no viable move. An important thing with endgames, you have to make sure that your last move puts the opponent in check. Because if they're not in check and have no viable moves, it's a stalemate. You want to avoid that as best as possible because it counts as a draw. And this mate can look one of a couple ways. It can be on this side of the board. Can be on this side of the board, but it has to involve that crisscrossing where there is no way for them to move forward. The reason why, for example, this won't work, yes, it counts as a check, but they've got an escape route. Over here, you've got the same problem. Over here. You also have the option of, generally speaking, here at least places in check, but then you can't move that queen forward or that rook forward onto that direction, but you can put it on here, but the king still has an escape route. So that's why it's important to have that single direction. The other kind of mate that we can have here doesn't involve the queen at all, because more often than not, a queen will end up either being involved in the endgame or captured. So, let's do. We'll do that. So this is another type of checkmate. Notice that the king is back on that corner, and the G file is taken care of. The 7 file is taken care of because of that rook. And they can't capture the rook because of that pawn. And they can't move, let's say they're here, and the last move is the rook going here. This is in particular checkmate because that knight is covering both the H8 and H6 file. There's nowhere for the king to go, and they are in a condition of check. So that is where you start getting to some of the little moves that you make to try and push towards these endgames. And usually you can work your way back. I need a knight to survive, so I don't want to do any moves that sacrifice both of the knights. You can sacrifice one of them. I don't want to sacrifice both of the rooks. If you have a plan for your endgame, you can usually try and work your way back or figure out another way to do it. Another common one is what we call the back rank mate. I'll put this here. So this is where you can either use this with a rook or a queen, some sort of inner file, where they're trapped by their own pieces. They can't move onto G8 there because that's still in check. The pawns can't move forward to move out of the way in turn, so you're blocked. Now you're running into the trouble of there's nowhere for you to move. It is checkmate. Also, bishops end up playing a big part in certain ones. So remember how I talked about the concept of these bishops being able to cover a wide range of turf? Let's say they're like that. And you had a bishop set up like this. So notice that entire diagonal is covered. The king has nowhere to really go. This is checkmate. So this is a double bishop to where this entire space is covered. There's no viable escape route. Noticing a pattern there. All you're trying to do is make sure that you have enough pieces at the end game, or trying to advance this pawn as far as possible, because let's say that this, we'll do it like that. The king could try moving this direction, right? You'd think that pawn was kind of at risk. Move it here, you place the king in check. Well, the king can't move into f8 because of the way that pawns can capture diagonally. So now you force them into a position where they have to move into one of 2 available places. Either this or this. If you're black, that's the worst move. This is the slightly better move because you may have an escape route. But if this knight's there, you're running out of options and quick. Now, this is checkmate here, because you've cut off all of the remaining options. But you also have, let's say you wanted to wait a little, you can promote that queen. And having a queen when they don't have a queen is dastardly powerful, because now there's only so much you can do. You can especially do something like they move up. Now that would be a mistake because of the piece right there. If they're moved up, now you've got the same conditions, especially if you can hem in with no diagonal options and no options. Notice that a queen, as long as protected by another piece, because it could be like this, could be like this, could be like this. As long as that piece that's checkmating is protected, you've got a clear idea of the way that you can go about with these checkmates. So I would take a look online and I would take a study into some of these pieces. Are there pieces that you like using? Are there pieces that you like working with? Are there pieces that you don't like working with? And why? I used to hate working with knights because it would always end up being in the middle, and I just want to get them out of the way. Learn to work with each of your pieces because each piece is going to have a very important value. So take a step back, now that we've talked about checkmates in a little bit of detail, I promise you, there's always more history to talk about. We can go from there with our classic game. Over the last couple of episodes, you've heard us say a lot of names. They're the names of moves, they're the names of move sets or systems or variants. So we talked about the Ruy Lopez very early on. There's a system called the Caroca, also available at the library, just so you know. We also talked about variations. There's Najdorf and Kerez. If it's a name, I would not be surprised to find out there's a variant name for it, because so many people have spent time studying this game, and it became where magazines and monthly periodicals were entirely devoted to people coming up with the ideas of chess strategy and a new way to play and better ways to play and defenses and attacks. So, what changed the way that we think about games? Well, computers. More on that in a second. So, one of the things that I wanted to do, me and Phil obviously talked about this well in advance, and I wanted Phil to show off one of a high-level game so you can see just some of the complexity that goes into some of these decision-making. So, tell me what you got.
Well, there's so many games I could have chose from, and chess.com has Game of the Day, an archive. There's a library on chessgames.com, which is fantastic. I urge people to go in and look at those great games. We could choose Bobby Fischer. We could choose Magnus Carlsen. But I chose the 2018 Women's World Championship match. I believe it was a 6-game match, and the defending world champion was down. She was losing a little bit. And she needed to win the 6th game. She needed to win, not a draw. But there she is looking a little bit concerned. She's playing the black pieces, and she just comes through and plays a great game, and we'll see what happens here. And the World Championship ended up going to tiebreak games, and she ended up winning. It was fantastic. So it was a great comeback story. She held in there and did a great job. I'm not quite sure why there's separate men's and women's world championship tournaments, but there are. That's just how it is right now. So we're going to play through this game.
Yes, so you have me playing as white.
Yes.
So first is that we referred to that king side opening, e4. So that is the Sicilian, I believe, correct?
Yes.
So and F3, so this will look familiar to those of you who watched a couple episodes ago.
Right. Knight to C6.
C6. Then we move into BB5, which is a pretty bold, looks like that Ruy Lopez opening.
It does. It's not, though. So I ignore that and develop something here with a G6.
But it also means that I've freed up this space and I can capture. So only 4 moves in, that's about the earliest you can do it, is castling. So I've done this pretty early, try and protect my piece.
Yeah, and this is like a King's Indian defense, I believe.
Like I said, everything has a name. So then the next one is this rook over to E1. You saw in some of the previous games that we've played, we had the option to do that at will.
E5, we've got kind of a closed Ruy Lopez going here, almost.
And you will, if you watch a broadcast, you'll hear them admittedly talk a little like this with a little bit of the jargon, but I'm trying to give you as many names as possible that you can Google all of these, and it's got full move sets.
Right, the World Chess Championship is coming up in November too, so stay tuned for the big guns, Magnus Carlsen defending his World Championship. So that's always fun to watch in November.
And then A3?
A3, I respond with knight on G to E7.
That's that one.
See, it's telling you knight on G because either knight could end up there, so.
So notice how a lot of these early moves do look fairly similar. Let's set N, C3.
Okay, we're castling. And I'm in danger here. If I lose this game, I'm out. I've lost the world championship for the women.
All right, next one for me. Instead of taking that piece, I had talked about previously the notion of potentially putting that king at risk.
Okay.
So
Not too worried about it right now. D6, just
All right.
supporting my pawns.
And I'll move this. So notice how everything has this supporting structure. No pieces have been captured,
Right.
but just about everything's been accounted for at this point.
H6, kind of preventing that bishop from coming over for the
And
time being.
here's where it starts getting a little crowded.
Yeah, knight to
And
D5.
D5 over here.
King to H7. King's moving quickly here.
And why would you put in that position?
I'm not entirely sure about that one.
Hey, are they that concerned about the bishop?
It may have something to do with not wanting the knight to end up here and being able to check.
That's true.
Possibly right now the bishop, there's some defensive maneuvering going on there. But
That's fair.
I trust this world champion as a reason behind that.
And that's usually why you will hear them talk about a game after. Why did you do
Yeah.
that? And they will explain it without fail every time.
Right.
All right. So K,
C3.
and it's KH7 by the way, not KH8.
Yeah. Whoa, correction.
So then the C3 here. I'm trying to keep that structure going.
C3. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. F5. Because if you make F5, okay.
And what's this, move 12. Took us 12 moves to capture one piece. But at this point, we're making a lot of these decisions into what to do next. So I'm generally down for losing that center piece because it opens up a little bit more, especially with this rook here.
And I'm not feeling too great about my game right now. When I look at this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the reigning world champion here on the women's, and I'm kind of being outplayed, I think.
B4.
Okay, knight to G6. But something's kind of being developed. Oh, okay.
I'm pushing hard
B5,
forward.
all right. Knight to A5. I'm just gonna get out of the way here. Attack your bishop.
So this bishop's going to retreat, and notice keep that diagonal attack going.
Okay. Bishop to E6. Starting to kind of plan something here. If you move that.
And
knight.
sometimes some of these moves don't make sense to me, so I'll look and be like, what am I missing? They don't always play the best move, but it's the best move for what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So queen will move here to A4. For context here, I'd be interested in putting some pressure with this knight because it would be putting it in check, even though that is a sacrifice. You do have to at least spend a turn doing something, and sometimes that's really all you can do.
Yeah.
BD2.
Rook to G8. All the attention seems to be on this side of the board.
And we would actually have a name for that. That's the king side attack. I'm kind of moving queen side. So sometimes you will see entire games where the board will almost be flipped with pieces. So, computers. As they became more advanced, part of the idea of creating better computers was to make them more complex. Well, how would you prove that they were actually more complex? Well, by solving these games and coming up with the best solution to a lot of these issues. Well, IBM, the American computing company, came up to the task with their Deep Blue. They got to the point of challenging Garry Kasparov, who was then the world #1 and world chess champion. The first time they met, Kasparov prevailed. He got close a couple times, but Kasparov still was able to outwit the computer progressively and over time. Well, a year later, Deep Blue called him back one more time. This time, Deep Blue won. For a couple of reasons. One, they had drastically improved the quality of the computer. And B, there was a quasi-glitch at the time where Kasparov resigned a game because he got psyched out by the computer. Why? Well, the computer had an error when it couldn't decide what to do. No idea what the next move was. I've got zero clue. They moved a piece at random. And Kasparov was like, okay, I'm clearly missing this. The game is clearly over. Something's wrong. Resigned. And then they went back into the code and found out that it was entirely random. The computer had nothing. But the computer prevailed, and we have only seen computers get better and better and better at chess. So that was your RG8, RA, D1.
Queen to D7.
And then knight to H4. That's where I'm going to potentially expose that knight to capture.
Okay. Bishop to H8.
So it keeps that diagonal going.
And it also frees up a file for the rook, which is kind of important. And maybe she foresaw this and had the king up there to defend that 6 moves ago, right?
And yes, so I'm going to take that.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's G6.
And I'll go ahead and take it with the rook. Now things are opening up on this side of the board.
And especially because all of a sudden
Whoa.
we're going to turn the game on its head.
Yeah.
And put the queen.
Now this is cause for concern here. Queen to H4, rook on A to G8. This is doubling your rooks, which is a nice thing to have.
Especially because if there ends up being a high value piece here, you could sacrifice the first rook, but then take that piece with the next subsequent rook.
Right. Queen to F7.
My favorite spot. Oh, I'm not trying to resign the game that early.
C4, okay. Bishop to F6. Queen's under attack.
And then my knight here is going to take that bishop and squeeze it out.
Okay.
And that king's going to be over there. And here's why that's important for a second before you move that. Hold on a second before you move that piece.
Sure.
Now notice that the queen could absolutely take that piece. But this queen on H4 is going to instantly take that. That would be to use the parlance, a blunder. Because you don't want to give up queen or especially queen exchange that early. But I've still placed in check. So how do you handle that one?
Right. It would be queen, queen, and then I would get an extra piece, so I would be able to take your knight. So I would come out ahead if you made that blunder. Right? Rook takes F6. I'm just going to take it with the rook.
Which does invite that exchange there.
Okay, but it wouldn't be a good exchange.
Exactly. So I'm going to keep
F4,
developing on my end.
F4, I like that. Rook to G4. I want to me, this is interesting. I'm now trying to get that queen to move around a little bit.
Well, it would, if I captured here, it would be taken by that one. So I'm going to move here.
Okay, and now queen to H3. No.
Queen H3 is what I just did.
Yeah. Rook on F to G6.
So you're going to renew that double rooks.
Right.
This one's an interesting move to me, just because of the way that it's trying to move the game onto your side, which is going to take a couple turns.
See, if I capture, now we have the bishop too, so I'm not quite sure on that, but queen to G7.
You're going to be dominating that G file right
That
there.
file, yeah, I'm owning that file right now.
So I'm going to preemptively, because play this out. If I don't move, then that can be captured,
Right.
which can be captured by this, which can be captured by this.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to be
You
able
just-
to keep up that pressure if I really wanted to.
Okay.
Instead, I'm going to move over to the side.
Bishop to C8. Don't quite understand that, but that was her move.
I think that tries to account for maybe a renewed attack over here, especially if you move this D into a position to attack down here. But now we're really going to start squeezing into the turf, where now you could potentially lose one or both of the rooks.
Yes, I see what you just said there, yes. B7, attack, check.
And this highlights how a bishop in the right corner can just control half of the
that
board.
was a really important move.
G1, so now we're back into this filed position, which I'm not happy about, but that was my only valid move.
Okay, rook takes G3 check. I'm giving up a rook. How about that?
But
A
I'm
sacrifice.
taking that rook.
Yeah. Now I've got my other rook coming in. Check.
But instead, because this is technically a legal move, but I'm going to go ahead and make this move here.
King to F2. Rook to G2. And it's not checkmate, but you tell me why this is the game.
Well, so first problem, let's look at the legal moves that are left. Nope. 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 Nope.
Okay, if you did that, then all I would have to do is go like this, and it's checkmate.
Right. So at that point, there was, much like I did when we did that first example game, where I was trying to put all the pressure here. If they had tried to make some of these moves,
Yeah,
it wouldn't have developed the way that it did. This is why the people who are the best at the game will absolutely be in a position.
this was a spectacular win, I think, for the defending world champion. It was a big comeback. She played huge. She got out of this spectacularly, and she ended up winning and retaining her title through a series of tiebreak games. So it's like, never give up. You're playing the black pieces. You came up with a great game plan. Boom. So I like this game.
Yeah, it's a really good game, and it really hammers home a lot of the concepts that we've talked about over the last 3 episodes. So, especially if you're at this point, thank you in the first instance for being here for all of it. Hopefully this helps demystify the game somewhat.
Yeah, and like me, you can play chess for many, many years. You can start at 8 or 9 and play for decades and still like the game and still learn about the game, still enjoy playing. It's definitely a mental challenge to focus, plan, think things through, don't give up. That's why kids in school learn chess, because it promotes some really good thought processes and values and sportsmanship. And to me, it's the best game. I know you're doing many, many other games, but to me, chess is the ultimate. So that's what I'd like to say about chess. It's fun, it's challenging, and you can always learn more about chess.
See why I called for backup? Thank you for being here.
Thank you,
It's been
John.
very helpful.
Enjoy being with you here.
I got one more little bit for you, and then we'll head out. One last thing before we go. I've talked a lot about the history of chess, and you've heard us talk a lot about the ways in which you can learn about chess. I want to bring up a couple examples. One, if you look up chess grandmasters, you can find that they have interviews and books and straight up websites and mobile apps in order to teach you particular styles or teach you the basics. I always recommend you start there. I use a website called Lichess, which is a free and open source mechanism by which you can learn about chess. It gives you puzzles and teaches you the basic concepts of the game. I always like people starting there, because then you can move to actually playing other people and learning from your games. And because it's free and open source, I personally like recommending it. Also, more often than not, watch a series of games. You can find them on YouTube. The World Chess Championship happens every 2 or so years. There are what are called candidates tournaments that happen in that cycle where people play to have the right to challenge the World Chess Champion. The World Chess Champion always gets to defend their title. So you will have hundreds of thousands of tournaments to look back on in the 20th century alone. Start there and work on refining your game, work on learning some of the openings, learning the end games that you like going for, and work best for you. And start with the tactics puzzles. I promise you, your game will improve drastically if you start doing some of the chess puzzles. You can find them on websites. You can even find them in the newspaper. They're there if you're willing to go look for it. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. I want to give a special thanks to Phil Krakowiak, the Adult Services Librarian at the Madison branch, for joining us and helping me demystify this game a little bit. Be sure to check out some of the chess club programming that's out at that branch. Also, be sure to check out some of the great NPL Universe programming that's out there on our website, library.nashville.org.